Welcome back to the Facts First podcast. I'm your host, Tim Blaine. My guest today is Dr. Juliette M. Engel, a physician, humanitarian, and author whose life has taken an extraordinary path. Today, she's here to discuss, among other things, her memoir, Sparky, Surviving Sex Magic, a deeply personal account of childhood trauma, survival, recovered memory, and the experiences that ultimately shaped her lifelong commitment to fighting human trafficking and advocating for vulnerable children. Dr. Engel, thank you so much for being here. This is
Glad to be here.
very cool to have you. Cool. What a terrible word to describe.
It's so
this
hot.
is so cool. I know. Yeah, right. Exactly. I was just mentioning my air conditioner is broken here, so I'll probably start sweating during this, but we'll see how we do.
Feel free.
So I read your book, Sparky, which remind me what year that you released that.
I released that 4 years ago, so the
Okay,
end of
okay.
2021.
Okay, gotcha. But it's still, I mean, as we'll get into later, it's as important a topic as ever. I wanted to talk to you first about, and viewers and listeners will kind of get a sense of all the details of this as we move forward through it. But this is a memoir that is documenting your very, very traumatic childhood, and how you eventually were able to escape it and lead a productive life. I wonder, and the reason I asked when it was published, so I would imagine there were so many feelings when you finally got this story down and released it, and the whirlwind of all the things. Has having a little distance from its release into the world changed the way you feel about the memoir and about it being out there?
Well, I'll say about my childhood is that I was raised in the CIA cult called MK Ultra, and which was largely started by my uncles, who were OSS agents in Nuremberg and worked with the Nazi scientists from the concentration camps. And actually, instead of trying them and hanging them for the horrible things that they did over the course of the years that they had free access to people, the CIA decided to bring them to the United States. They brought 1,500 of them to Huntsville, Alabama, distributed them around the United States, and started a program called MK Ultra, which is Mein Kampf Ultra, and it comes out of the concentration camps. And because the Dulles brothers had decided, along with the current American government, this would be in 1953, that we could use that these kinds of experiments could never be repeated. It was a crime against humanity that was committed year after year after year. And in my opinion, that research should have been just destroyed, and those scientists should have been hung, but they weren't. And now we're suffering from the consequences today, which is why I wrote Sparky. The first people, or the first subjects into the program, the first children into the program, I can write about children because I went in as a very young child, were put in the program by their parents, who were in the military, in the secret services, in the spies. They were the spies. My uncle was one of the founders of the NSA. And they put their own children, their own eldest child, into the program. And I was often directly under Sidney Gottlieb, who was they brought in to run the program. He was a Zionist, and he was known as the chief poisoner of the CIA. And his specialty was LSD. And he brought in LSD by the tonnage. And this is all documented. This is, I'm not saying anything that you can't look up in the National Security Archives. And I'll give you the links to the National Security Archives, which were only declassified in December of 2024. So this was started in 1953. I was placed in it by my father, sold into it in a ritual by my father in 1955. We can talk about my time in it, but I escaped at 1966 and put myself through college and medical school and went on to run an underground railroad in the former Soviet Union. And just now, all this time later, after all this trauma, thousands of people have been through this program. It's destroyed lives. Its entire reason to be, as explained to me in the 50s, was genocide. That there were too many people in the world, 90% had to go, and it would become our job to eliminate 90% of the people, because as the children of the elite, we were the goats, they were the sheep, and our job was to take out the sheep. And it's happening. You're seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got people who have been through this program and are running food companies, energy companies, airlines. The Senior Executive Service runs 76 government agencies, and they've all been through this program. So that's why I wrote Sparky. I couldn't remember my childhood. I knew I had to, because I have to share this. I'm 77 years old. I want people to know what happened in the early 1950s, and not many people can share it,
Right.
because most
And,
people didn't survive.
you mentioned that you couldn't remember, and that struck me as like there were many points in your life. If you had tried to write the memoir, it would have been a bunch of blank pages, because as you talk about later in the book, that all these things were just it was just gone. And obviously, that's a common thing with trauma victims, is these memories get repressed, and then you went through the process of unearthing them and rediscovering them, and a lot of that had to do with physically going back to where this stuff had happened, and I mean, which is astounding, because you're kind of then going through it twice, in a sense, because your mind had shut that out as a defense mechanism. Um, was the act of then writing it down a catharsis of sorts, or did it feel like that was trauma again?
Well, it was trauma again to remember again, but it was also catharsis, because until I understood it, you know, how you remember things, a child is a magical thinker. So as it came to me as it went in, which was as magical thoughts and monsters, and I had to take my adult mind and get it around the places and the times and the smells and the mechanisms and the schools, and we moved all the time, as you know from Sparky. I would come back from sessions with MK Ultra. The teachers would take one look at me. The social workers would come to the house, and my parents would move. Um, so and no one in my family has ever, given me any information or any help, and they certainly could have, especially my uncle. Um, Nothing
Yeah.
except
Yeah.
shut up and this is what you're for. I mean, that's when my father sold me in 1955. Um, he took me to a park. I had no idea anything that was going to happen. He introduced me. Coincidentally, there was this old Navy buddy, gave me a Coca-Cola. And the next thing I did is I woke up being attacked from behind. And my father, right by my face, taking money for this. And when I screamed and cried, and he turned to me and said, shut up. This is what I raised you for.
Mm.
And although I forgot everything else, I was able to wipe every other memory, but not that one. So I could never look at my father in all the years to come without
Of course.
a little button going, wait a minute. Something
Yeah.
wrong with this guy.
But so when you were like, you had that little button, as you say, and then a bunch of blank pages, until you unearthed those memories, did you kind of, I mean, I think you mentioned in the book you would still see your parents on like Thanksgiving, as an adult, and Christmas. So there was at least a cordial relationship. Did that change when you rediscovered all the memories, or the
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
that's in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as I started to remember, I mean, I put myself through college. I put myself through medical school. They eventually moved not far from me, actually, when I was still in college. They moved close by. Um, we weren't close, but I kept trying, and I wanted a close relationship, and I wanted a family, and I wanted all those things that I'd never had, and they were there, but the responsiveness wasn't there, and I always had the feeling they were just watching me, and when I did remember, when I started to remember, was when my daughter was born, and I had this little tiny copy of me, and it's like I'm looking at my own face 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And then it started coming, and it was so awful. I was terrified that, if this was coming from me, then I was a danger to her. And that really set me off. So I did go. I confronted my father. My mother had left town, um, and said, I've got to remember. Tell me what happened. Something happened all those years ago, and you know what it is, and I need to know. And then I told him I was going to commit unaliving if he didn't help me. And he said, "Well, that's your choice." And then I got the click, click, click. This is what I raised you for. That
Mm.
he'd expected all along that I would unalive myself at the age of 30. And as soon as he said that, and I clicked back to the memory of the this is what I raised you for, I determined that no, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna fight this. He's not
Mm.
gonna get away with this. And I found a psychiatrist that I'd known in medical school that I really trusted, and I went to him and asked him if I was crazy or if I was a danger
Yeah.
to my child. That's what I was most worried about.
Sure.
Um, and if I had been, then the unaliving question would be on the table. But he said, "Nah,
Right. No, you're not correct. Yeah.
you're neurotic, you're hyperachiever, you don't know your limits, but you're not crazy."
Well, and then, part of what makes the story so fascinating, and you talk about how even with all of this trauma and all this stuff that was going on, and then in the in between times, you were making friends and sort of, a lot of it, people who were going through similar things, B, excelling to the extent you could at school, and partly because it probably came fairly easy for you because, as it was discussed, like you were a person of incredible intelligence, and they discovered that pretty early on and tried to, labeled you the smartest girl in Southern California, and then of course your parents upped and moved you before that anything could happen with that. But then going to med school, so I wonder about do you find that your intellect and your ability to look at things, from a scientific standpoint or whatever, helped you get through all of this, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have that kind of capability?
Oh, absolutely. I have been gifted with an amazing box of abilities, and I I I just recently filled in my missing years, which were 1961 to 1966. I couldn't remember where I was, what I was doing. I remember
Mm.
some of it, like the record exec parties in Murphy Hot Springs, but what was I doing? And it turns out I was, and now I remember it. I was at Fort Point, and Fort Point is the farthest point north of the Presidio. And the Presidio is a star
Mm.
fort at the northwest corner of San Francisco. Fort Point is the point that extends out under the Golden Gate Bridge. And they used Fort Point, the bridge goes over it, to put to build the Golden Gate Bridge because it was so stable and so deep, the rock. But I was there, and I was there because the U.S. Army Psychological War Department was there. So that's where my classmates included Michael Aquino, who was maybe a year and a half older than me. And for much of the time I was there, I was bigger than he was. So, so he was there. Charlie Manson, that we called Chuck, he was there pretty much all the time. He was maybe 15 years older than me. Phil Spector was there.
Okay.
Anton LaVey was developing the Church of Satan. And my entire life was music. There were a lot of future musicians who you've heard of, you know of. They've had tragic stories. They all came through Fort Point, where they went through the MK Ultra programming and got into drugs. But Fort Point has this magical, they called it magical. I refuse to acknowledge magical, but it has, it's like it pierces the dimensions because it goes out towards the sea. And on one side you have San Francisco Bay and the other side you have the Pacific Ocean. And if you time it just right and the frequencies are just right and you can travel in that space between the two, like interdimensionally, and go into other spaces. And so they had us doing that. And I think it was similar experimentation was going on at Montauk. And of course, the danger is you get caught. You get caught with you move your energetic electrical body out of your physical body. And you can do that for short periods, but you have to get back. And a lot of kids don't get back. And I had one experience where I nearly didn't get back. And I swear I was in hell. I mean, looking at hell and realizing that, yeah, I could stay in that. They were building me up as a performer and a psychic and a new age personality. And they would back me to the hilt. So, audiences, stadiums, all this. But they would take my soul. And I saw what that looked like. It looked like hell. And I understood that the performers that did that, they're living in hell. Their lives are awful. So anyway, we were writing the Satanic Bible. So I want to make absolutely clear that there's nothing magic about, well, unless you consider time travel, interdimensional travel, and that we were going through space and time and bringing back stories and canon and characters, beings.
Okay. So you mentioned how so much of this in the book as well, there was obviously a lot of it was, drugging you and manipulation through various,
Drugs.
and LSD and, just so much stuff. And, and then the book reads, you can tell it's this, you talk about the imagination of a child and how, you have this magical thinking and sort of retracing your steps took you through the way you described these were very much the way that a child with magical thinking is doing this whole their heritage in Scotland and you and your friends are trying to get to Scotland by tunneling through these magic tunnels and things like that, which I wonder about. Are you able to kind of separate even from even back then or at any point memories that are clear and concrete from times when you didn't have anything in your system versus memories of how much do you question of did I have this conversation? Was this kid even real that I talked to because, and we'll get to who Sparky is in a moment, but, what do you feel like you have a good foundation or is it just sort of I remember what I remember and I have to just trust what my mind tells me now?
Well, I have the first thing they do to you as a subject, as an infant, as a young child in mind control, is they start the process of dividing your mind.
Yeah.
So that you develop what's called dissociative identity disorder. It's actually a very profound defense mechanism. So you'll be at a Saturnalia, witness absolutely horrific things, and then be able to completely wall it off and forget it. It doesn't mean you don't have the physical effects, but in terms of memory, I could block that off. The thing about remembering and it's clear to me how you tell a false memory or a shaky memory or something you might have picked up somewhere else and incorporated it is if you remember the physical aspects of something. So in the book Sparky, I describe the Saturnalia. I take one. I want people to understand what it is and what it does and how these are done to children. They're being done all the time, all over this country. But I do not want to give anything to anyone that would enable them to start doing this because,
Sure. Yeah.
because they will. I mean, people are curious and they don't realize the danger. It's extremely dangerous. So the real memories, the ones I'm absolutely sure of, come with the smells, come with the tastes, come with the
Sure.
sensation on my skin. So it's a total body memory. And that's
a really
different
interesting
than
distinction. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm glad you mentioned that because it is, I think about the book, which, by the way, and I should add, it's so beautifully written. I
oh,
hope
thank you.
you feel so good about that because the prose in this book is it's so, just from a strict writing standpoint, it's really, really well done. So I hate to say I enjoyed reading it because it's such a traumatic thing to be reading about, and I know it's important, but like it's a thoroughly, incredibly written book, and of course an important and incredible story. But it is interesting. You really don't really hammer the reader with, as you said, like so many details of these things, but there is so much that is in there, even in the little bits where as a reader, you get it. You get the sense of like what this was. And you really, I know you say in an attempt not to allow people to copy this, but I also think as a reader, you read it and I wasn't lacking for, but I wish she'd described another one of these Saturday Night. Like you said what it was, and the reader immediately goes, okay, I get that, and I can understand how traumatic that was. So that was very effective. And then we as a reader get to see what else is going on. The people you're meeting, the moves, all the sort of the story, the other parts of the story. Yeah, there wasn't a question in there as much as like that was something that I really thought was great about it. It was that this like incredibly powerful thing you can describe once, twice, and it sticks with you the entire book. Actually, the question is there: did you have versions of the book where you had more of that stuff in there and you kind of actively took it out, or was it always your intention to be like, all right, I'm going to keep that stuff to a minimum?
That's about all I could stand to remember. So
Mm.
I thought one was
Yeah.
enough.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
I could go on, of course, and I think one is enough, as long as
Yeah.
people understand what it was and how it was used, and I don't want people to repeat it. I've also
Right.
subsequently remembered ceremonies where groups of kids, this is when I was younger, even younger, were taken to the beach in Tijuana, in Mexico, at the Autonomous University of Mexico. And we lived like savages on the beach for weeks in just our underpants. And at night, if we wanted to eat, they would start cooking. And if we wanted to eat, we had to take the drugs, which were injected, and time travel or travel to outer space. And because that's what we were supposed to, because that was one of the places. Like Fort Point was one of the places that's like the the way they describe it. This the membrane between dimensions is thin, and you can slide along it if you're artful, which took a lot of training. I mean, you don't just jump in there and do that. And on the beach in Mexico, of course, we were littler kids, so it had to be cruder. But it was you could stand there, and it's like the night sky would open, and all of these entities would come through. And how much is drugs? How much is real? How much is? But there are places on Earth. Certainly, Crimea is one of them, where all of this is just right in front of you. And I experienced that in Crimea much, much later. I was in my 40s, but it's like the sky opens and you can see beyond the veil. Not
Hmm.
everybody can. About
Right.
most people I was with couldn't, but I could. And I think that was part training, part we were innately able to do that. I wouldn't ever
I
do
see.
that deliberately again.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, talk about, I mean, the book is, Sparky, and can you tell us about who Sparky was or is?
Sure. Um, the way my MK Ultra programming went, um, half of the year, half of the school year, I was in a program site. They called them annexes, and because the schools would notice that I was being abused and come to my parents' house, we were constantly moving. So half the time I was in an annex, but it was a different one every time. And the rest of the time, I was home with my family so that I could learn to look like and act like and be a normal, deceptive, a goat in disguise kind of. That's how they described it to me. But a kid in school. Um, so that's. What was the question? I
Oh,
lost
who?
myself.
But then talk about who Sparky is, and
Oh,
how
Sparky.
she came to be.
Yes. So every time we would move, I would be a different character, and so I would have an imaginary persona, imaginary name. It helped me because I would then forget everything that went before. I wouldn't remember the year before, um, and I would take on a new identity. One year I was a horse, so magical thinking, kids thinking, and you start getting towards 10 and 10 years old, and I was starting to feel the twinges of puberty and understanding that my life was gonna, I was gonna become an adult, and my relationship with all these little boys I'd always hung out with was going to change because they were going to change too, and uh, on a train trip from Chicago to San Diego. We were moving to San Diego, moving to Imperial Beach. Um, I created a character called Sparky and Sparky McGregor. And my family clan is McGregor. And they're fierce warriors. I'd had an old book about them, and I'd read, or my grandmother had read me stories about the McGregor clan. And I wanted to be a warrior. I wanted Sparky looked like Prince Valiant. If you remember that black black hair
Yeah.
and a neat hairdo and polished shoes and a kilt and everything I wanted but didn't have. And she was very confident and fierce and a great fighter. And I didn't see myself that way at all. And she was smart and energetic and outgoing, and I saw myself as a droopy failure of a kid. So I created this alternate personality who was Sparky McGregor, became Sparky McGregor when I signed up for school in the 5th grade in Imperial Beach. Actually used that name, and in my life became Sparky McGregor. I became the warrior. I became the tough kid. I became the kid with the kilt and the fighting the fight and the girl with the brains. So I became my alter ego, which was
And
actually
you
quite an
mentioned going to
accomplishment.
yeah. I mean, it's remarkable, and in the book you talk about how then at some point she is not there anymore, and then again is back. Um, but you also talked about how at that school there was beyond the very very initial, like, wait, that's not your name. The teachers were and the kids let you go as Sparky McGregor. Um, but I also was struck by how helpless the teachers felt, because there seemed to be, at least in the book, like an awareness of what was going on. And like, they had these kids who were like being taken away for these, absences, and come back and kind of clearly, okay, something really bad is going on. But as teachers, they were kind of, we're all we can do is like teach them at school. We're not allowed to get involved. We're like, we're kind of hamstrung. Um, and then of course the fact that it's connected to government on high, there was really, certainly as the reader, there was no like, well, why didn't you just do this? Because it just, everything felt like, well, what could you do? Did you did have a couple people who tried to help and who did help. Can you talk about a couple of the people that were sort of on your side and helped you?
Well, teachers often were, even though they didn't understand what was going on. And sometimes I remember one time I had a particularly terrible experience, and I went to the pastor at St. James Church in Imperial Beach, and I just broke down and was trying to explain to these people in the church um, about the NSA. Here's this 10-year-old giving them a talk on what the National Security Agency is and how the CIA works internationally and the NSA works in the United States. Because I'd heard all this stuff, and they didn't understand anything I was saying, but I could tell they really felt for me, and they would help if they understood what on earth was happening. And but they didn't, and at that time, pre-internet, pre-computerized records, all my parents had to do was move to the next school district, and we were out of range, so they could start over
Wow.
again. And the teachers, if the schools hadn't been good to me and the teachers hadn't been so kind and eventually helped me get into university without informing my parents, which is how I escaped, um, they helped me escape and even gave me a high school credit that I hadn't earned so they could graduate a year early. And I didn't even know they'd done that uh, until like a year later. But they had gotten together and done that so that I could escape. I don't think they knew what I was escaping, but they believed that I needed to. I needed to get away. Um, so they people outside of my family in general were lovely.
Yeah.
Even in Russia, in all my years in Russia, I met wonderful people, and even mercenaries and gun runners and um, mafia dons that hated child trafficking, which is a lot of them. Um, I didn't ever feel in danger from them like I did
Just
every
from your
time.
family.
Yeah, just from
Yeah.
my family.
Oh, so then
So
you talked about going to University of Washington, and then and you from early on had your sights set on being a doctor. I wonder about just the notion of being a healer as opposed to someone who's getting trauma inflicted upon them. I would imagine was an appealing thing. You then started visiting Russia and the Soviet Union, I guess at that point, right? And you know. Can you talk about, and you tell a horrible story, but like a story about visiting a hospital in Russia and seeing the conditions of these women in labor and how that was, and then how you were able to, change that. Can you talk a little bit about those experiences?
sure. In 1990, I was 40. I had a successful practice. Uh, my kids were heading off into college, and I was invited to go to Russia. And uh, I went. I didn't. I didn't even question it. I went with a group called the Citizens for Soviet American Dialogue, and they included a lot of famous authors and performers and people who, in retrospect, probably came right out of Fort Point. But I went, and this was in 1990, and almost immediately I was sort of swept away from the group and taken by a group of doctors because they wanted an American doctor to see the true conditions of the hospitals there, which were horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And I described that in Sparky, but it was so bad, and the trauma was so severe that triggered like a response in me. Like, when had I seen this before? And previously, so I didn't remember exactly why I had seen bloody infants or women who'd been um, traumatized in that way. Um, so I couldn't remember the specifics, but I remembered the smell. Again, it's the smell with me. It's always the smell. And that just triggered a rage in me, like how dare anyone do this to these babies and these mothers? And, this is sacred. This shouldn't happen. And I did remember that the last time I'd experienced that, I'd been absolutely helpless because it was being done to me and to the kids around me. And because I was a goat, I wasn't killed. That's the only reason. It was my family connections. I was hurt uh, and tortured and tormented, but the child on my left and the child on my right were killed. And so suddenly it was like, okay, I'm seeing this again. I didn't know really from where, but I'm not helpless this time. I'm an American
Yeah.
doctor. I've got my education. I've got my training. At that time, I actually had uh, good money, and if anybody could do anything, I could. So that was it. I like instantly committed to improving things, because how can you have peace in the world if you can't be born and be born in peace? And they were like born into torture. Um, and I spent the next 20 years tracing or helping reform maternal-infant health care, which they wanted. They wanted very much. So it was a pleasure to do it. But then I discovered the children were disappearing. So a third of the babies born in the maternity houses were given away to orphanages. And there were all kinds of schemes to get the parents to, like, they thought they were temporarily giving up their children, not unlike what happens
Mm.
in this country, and that they'll get their children back when they're settled down, and then the children disappear into the system. They never see them again. So I followed these children, and I found out that about 20% of them, uh, well, even more than that, were being taken right after graduation or after they had matured, before they were 17. They were taken, loaded onto buses, and shipped overseas. And I followed a bus. A group of children went missing in northern Russia, an orphanage I'd been going to for several years. And I followed that bus all the way up to Murmansk, which is the very northern part of Russia. And then there was a bus. I took a bus from Murmansk to Kirkenes in northern Norway. And that's where the trail ended. And I went into the police department in Kirkenes and asked about the buses of Russian children coming from Murmansk, and the desk sergeant pulls open a drawer, and it's all full of Polaroid pictures of children's faces, but they're all dead. And
Mm.
that was, I should have. He basically pulled open the door and he said, "Do you see your kids in here? Can you identify them?" And I it I couldn't do anything but just stare. And
Sure. Yeah.
oh, yeah, I should have taken pictures of the pictures, or just taken the pictures and walked off with them, or because by the next day they'd organized their response and they were saying, "Oh no, there aren't any pictures," but they did admit that there were mass graves, and they would put the Russian children in the mass graves, and they would call them all Natasha, and that was it again. So I came back to the U.S., got one of the first grants from the Trafficking in Persons Office of the State Department. That would be in 2003, and put together a program to document human trafficking from the former Soviet Union, which I think they never thought I would do, actually. Um, but I did,
Yeah.
and
But you did,
yeah,
yeah.
and they were not, because what what we discovered when we went into depth in all the different regions of the former Soviet Union, we eventually did a chat room that went from, this is the first chat room they'd ever done in the Soviet Union, that went from Khabarovsk to Kaliningrad. That's 11 time zones. And we collected enough information to say how much trafficking was going on in all of these regions. And we got the information about who was doing it, how it was doing it, where they were going. I mean, it was an enormous pile of information that 500,000 data points. It was enough to get a law passed in Russia against child trafficking. And then it revealed the 3 top countries that the trafficking victims were being sent to. And the number 1 was Germany, number 2 was Israel, and number 3 was the United States. So I gathered up all this information, went off to the UN, went to Congress, went to the State Department. Nobody wanted to know. It was the shock of my life. I thought, here we go. This is it. This is how it comes in.
Yeah.
This is who's doing it. There's back and forth going on here. It's going to involve American children. Nothing.
And you weren't just working on your own, like you were working from a grant that had been provided. This was an official quest that you were on. This wasn't just some side project you were on. Then you had, I would assume also did you have like backing? Did you have backing from, or did I lose you here?
Yeah, the backing was coming from the State Department, but they wanted me to just sort of smear Russia, and not, the last thing they wanted was to implicate the United States. But you couldn't go very deep into it without.
Yeah, the Russia aspect of it, for sure.
Where they were going.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the
so
flights,
then were you,
we had the paths, we knew what cities, we knew who was picking them up at the airport. We had all of this.
Wow. So yeah, you were starting to talk about what you did after being basically stonewalled by the American government.
Yeah, I wanted to do a nationwide public information campaign. And by nationwide, I mean the whole former Soviet Union. Did 2 things. One is to create a coalition of organizations all over the former Soviet Union, and eventually in North Africa, Asia, Israel, Middle East. We had 140 little tiny groups. This could be 2 people and a telephone, who were working to report to us through toll-free hotlines that we set up on who was being trafficked, where they were going, what their names were, information about them. And so it became a reporting system of who was going missing and where they were from. And then we developed relationships with international police in all the countries involved, worked with the consulates, because one of the jobs of consulates is to return kidnapped or trafficked people, return them home. So we developed a system for rescuing children, which is how we got such high numbers in terms of rescuing, because we wouldn't rescue just one. We'd rescue one and then go rescue the rest of them, because there would always be a group. So we ran that for almost 20 years. That was the Angel Coalition Underground Railroad. And we got funding from the Childhood Foundation in Sweden, Queen Sylvia's Foundation. We got support from Swedish Agency for International Development. It got harder and harder to get funding from the U.S. State Department, and they eventually put us under the UN International Organization of Migration, who I'm quite sure was actually using us to launder money, because we stopped getting any information about, we would get grants, but we'd never see them. And we get reports that we had 15 employees when we had 2. We were being used. So it was like we went from being this energetic, spunky, go-get-'em NGO, which in my mind, that's what an NGO is supposed to be, into a captured a captured that was being used for other purposes, and it was really the end of us. But we'd done enough so that the Russian organizations kept going, and they've been very effective, and they're still effective in, the hospital systems got better, the birthing centers got better, and the Angel Coalition helped build anti-trafficking groups in all the different Russian oblasts, which are still functioning today, and we got some good laws passed. And then I came back here,
Yeah.
haven't been able to
Was
do
it a good
much of
time to?
anything.
Well, I know. It's that's a frustrating thing, I would imagine. But what struck me immediately was, wow, at least you must feel very proud of that work despite hitting all the roadblocks, because obviously to be able to go from what you experienced to be able to then help so many other children and mothers, that should come, I hope, with a huge sense of pride, even if it's unfinished work. Um, I do want to pivot a little bit with our time that we have left, because I know, and this was not in the book, but is relevant in today's news or today's world, that you later in life had interactions with Jeffrey Epstein and were in and around him. Could you talk about
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah, in 1988, this is before I went to Russia, um, but I was thinking about writing. I wanted to write, but I wasn't at Sparky yet, and I wasn't at writing a memoir yet. And um, I was invited to go to a book party. I was living in Seattle and the um, San Juan Islands. So there's a beautiful collection of islands off the coast of Washington State. And I was invited up to Friday Harbor uh, to stay with a friend of mine, Ruth B.B. Hill, who's a very famous author herself. And she'd been invited to go to a book party at a friend of hers. And the chief of police had just written a book. And so we were going off to meet other authors and have a social evening. But it didn't quite work out that way. So the chief of police drove Ruth and I to this beautiful cliff top house, all glass, just sort of molded into the cliffside. I mean, spectacular, beautiful house. And he said, "Well, this is my friend," and he gave his name. And he said, "Yeah, he's CIA, and his wife has disappeared, and he's kind of depressed. So we're gonna cheer him up tonight." And so we went in there, but the party was weird. It wasn't really a party; it was a collection of men, and kind of strange. I mean, my radar. In retrospect, it was my MK Ultra radar was just going off like crazy, and seaplanes started flying in and landing out in front of the house. And the guys started coming in. They were obviously the Iran-Contra pilots. Um, that was that was the era of the pilots flying drugs to Iran in exchange for guns that they gave to the Sandinistas, or I don't know, one way or the other. But they were often seen in bars in Seattle, and so I knew who they were. And two of them were Mark Epstein, and I'm quite sure, or Jeffrey Epstein, and I'm quite sure his brother Mark. Um, and they started like sort of zeroing in on me. And so there were only two women there. There were probably 30 men, and myself and Ruth B.B. Hill. And she's like 4 feet tall and 80 years old. So I was feeling kind of conspicuous. And so I wasn't eating or drinking anything, and really just wanted to leave, but couldn't because I was stuck there because the police chief had driven us in his truck, and so Jeffrey Epstein started telling me about how this group, and he meant the Sandinista boys and other guys who were in that room, were buying islands in the Caribbean, and that they planned to build luxury resorts for the world's elite, for the ultra wealthy. And he knew about my I had a technical company. I was a radiologist and specialist in ultrasound, and we were in the process of developing digital technology at that time. It had all been analog, and we were shifting to digital. So he was interested in whether I could take um, information about personal information, interviews, photographs, data from the elites that were going to come to this island, and whether I could transmit it and make it look like medical data. And I thought, yeah, with digital,
Wow.
sure, you could do that. And then I was thinking, why is he asking me this?
Yeah,
And
it's
he wanted me to work for him and to start developing ways to secretly transmit data about heads of state and royalty and wealthy people on his islands. He didn't say anything about the child abuse or the sexual abuse, but he had the vibe. He was just, he kept trying to get me to
uh,
come and to tour the house with him. And I know from a lot of the Epstein victims later that that's how he would rape women. He would get them to just innocently come see the view in a bedroom, and then they'd wind up locked in with him. I just had this sense going off all over me, and I did not go into any bedrooms, and I didn't leave uh, my friend Ruth Hill. Uh, I just didn't. So
yeah.
I think I had a protective mechanism without understanding exactly why. But
When his story started coming out more and more later, what was your first reaction in hearing about it?
when the information started coming out about him,
Yeah, yeah.
um, it wasn't surprising. It came out in 2005. He was convicted in Florida, and at that time, people were coming out with the information. People were coming forward. People were disappearing. A friend of mine was bribed. She wrote a book about him. Had done deep research into the Sandinistas and their role in human trafficking, and the CIA paid her $5 million not to publish it, and uh, and and she had to leave the country. I haven't heard from her
Wow.
since. Um, so all that was going on in 2005, and the pilots' logbooks were available in 2005. So, but what happened is Epstein was able to, like, he could be in his house all day, but he'd have to check into the Miami County jail at night. So, I mean, he was sort of on house arrest for uh, human tr- human trafficking, and it was basically a joke. And then it's like everyone forgot um, until 20 years later, and all has continued to go on. So there
That's
is a
wild.
case of mind control because it was the collective memory was erased in the public, so that these things are coming out again, and it's like it's the first time. Well, it's not, and all these were reasons, things that I could see and tell that drove me to, like, really knuckle down and explore my own experience. So how did I know these things? How could I do these things? Why did I have these instincts and this ability to sense what was going on? And obviously
Yeah,
there were big holes that I needed to discover, because people need to know.
it's so
It's
true.
it's
We're we're gonna wrap it here. We're having some tech issues. I don't know if people will see this later and it will be seamlessly edited. Hopefully it will. I know you're having trouble hearing me. So I just will leave it at. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. This is an incredible book. I can't recommend it enough for people to check out, as well as your other books. And thank you so much for all the work you've done around the world for this such an important cause. And thank you for talking to me today. Thank you for like sharing your story and your insights. And Dr. Juliette Engel, thank you so much.